Hello, everyone. Today we are having a panel, inshallah, on Tunisia, and we are very glad to have a very distinguished lineup of speakers. And as we all know, today is the anniversary, actually, of the start of the protest wave in the 10th anniversary of the protest in the Arab world. And we know that Mohammed Bouazizi, he set himself on fire on December 17 in Tunisia. And then it was a start of the whole events and maybe transformation throughout the Arab world. Actually, it was it made a very rapid reaction, and it made a huge impact on Tunisian politics because after 28 days of the start of the protest, Ben Ali regime was toppled, and Ben Ali left for Saudi Arabia. And this wave of protest, of course, then spread to other countries, including Egypt, Libya, Syria, and Yemen. And also it made impact on other countries as well. So to discuss and to understand what has happened in Tunisia during this past decade, we wanted to have a panel, and we tried to give a picture of Tunisian politics since 2011. So our panelists include Mr. Salah Oueslati. He is based in London, and he is a human rights lawyer. And we have Dr. Izzeddin Abdul Mewla. He received his PhD from Exeter University, and he works for Al Jazeera Center for Studies, and he's known with his works on democratization and media studies. And we have also Professor Larbi Sadiki. He's a well-known Tunisian figure with his works on democracy in the Arab world, especially with his work on Routledge Handbook of Arab Spring. And we have, of course, our director, Professor Ahmed Uysal. He is originally a sociologist, but he has developed a significant research agenda on the Arab world and the Middle Eastern studies. And he is a professor at Istanbul University currently, and he is directing our work at Orsam. So I would like to now give the floor to our speakers. We will have 10 to 15 minutes for presentations, and then we will probably receive some questions from the audience, and I will direct these questions to you. I will start with Mr. Salah to give us an overall view of what happened in Tunisia, and how is the political environment in today. So please, Mr. Salah.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and also thank you for everyone who's taken part in this conference. This is a glorious day which marks the starting point of a revolution started in Tunisia but did not stop there. It has taken the whole world by surprise, and it has repercussions everywhere. In considering the current situation in Tunisia as one of the countries of the included revolution, the Arab Spring, we need to have regard to other countries, especially our neighbor in Libya, and also the situation in Syria, dramatic situation in Syria, in which the dream of freedom for the Syrian people have been dealt a great deal of opposition from the international superpowers and from inside. And we need also to have regard to what happened in Yemen and what happened in Egypt after the coup d'etat. So assessing the situation or making a statement about what's happening in Tunisia right now should not be away from the situation in the whole region. And the statement that, or the question of, is Tunisia politically unstable now, in my view, is an overstatement of what is going on. I can see in Tunisia that there are constitutional institutions working normally. There is a democratic transition that took part at the head of state. One president has gone and the other took over, and another president has gone and another took over. This is not something usual in the Arab world. So our democratic constitutions in Tunisia are working. There is a parliament, there is a coalition in the parliament between three political parties. There is a government running the country, and also the judiciary is performing. We know that in a democratic state, the judiciary is the judge. It runs, it decides, and it settles. And in Tunisia, to some extent, the judiciary is playing this part. Probably you've heard what happened yesterday. The judiciary included itself in the post-revolution measures when it has freed its head under allegations of corruptions. These are all new signs of a new Tunisia that we didn't know before. So saying that Tunisia witnesses political instability is an overstatement. What I would say is Tunisia witnesses an attempt to destabilize the political stability rather than there's political stability. And we have seen that Tunisia at many turning points witnessed challenges in the like of terrorism on demand. So every time the country is getting ready for a new step, we witness terrorist attacks. It always coincides with turning points, which begs asking the question, why is it there always terrorist attacks when we need stability? Tunisia also witnessed international interference from international actors. This is clear. This is in cooperation with some local players or local actors, which include, but not limited to, part of the old regime, also some part of the left, not all of the left. Some of them are positive, some of them are against any change, and also part of the, let's say, civil society organizations that are political parties in disguise. These are the main internal players that are cooperating towards destabilizing the political situation. Have they achieved anything so far? Not really. They have tried to stop the parliament working, then they failed. They have tried to raise social instability through strikes and through protests. They did not succeed, at least so far. People are suffering in some ways, but also economy is not at its worst. Currency is to some extent stable. People are working and new recruitments are available in the economy. So also the economy is not at its worst. What I believe Tunisia needs, in addition to hard work, perseverance, and optimism, is to work on the following. Tunisia, it's clear that Tunisia lacks leadership to implement its plans, to leave this point of now what we are witnessing in Tunisia is accumulated attempts to destabilize the country. What we need is, and part of this is that the laws of the country, and in particular the electoral law, does not give, it is designed in a way not to give a clear mandate to a coalition or to a political party to govern and then to be held accountable for what it has achieved or not achieved. So I think the priority is to work on the electoral law and amend it so that it grants a clear mandate to a political party. These are the powers, here is liability, here's the authority, and then comes later on accountability. Now, look at, for example, the government of Mshishi. Mshishi is not, the government is not a government that resulted from the results of the election in parliament. It was like imposed and does not have support unless due to necessities of the political situation in Tunisia. What we need now, this state has to change. Those who are elected need to govern. This is the right position in a democratic country, and we need to go to this situation. The other thing is we need to remove the lockdown in the parliament. Some political parties in the parliament benefited from democracy but call for coup d'etats. Does this make sense? In Tunisia, it happens, probably somewhere else in the world, but this is not something kind, and it has to be rectified. We need leadership to guide us through. We need a political party who is brave enough to make decisions and to say what they want. I believe that the majority party, at least supposedly, which is another party, failed to put an impact on the political life in Tunisia. And now they are challenging, they need to settle peace within before moving out. So Tunisia needs probably a new political party with a strategic view to lead the country towards achieving its aims and its plans. We need also in addition to leadership, we need, in addition to solving the lockdown in parliament and the electoral law, the country needs to reach the balance between freedom and rule of law. The balance between freedom and rule of law. I'll give you an example to explain this, and it won't take long. So for example, post-revolution Tunisia witnessed hundreds of thousands of strikes on manifestations. Some of them, or part of them, or most of them were geared towards a halt of the economic and political situation. Are these all protests legal? No. But because when freedom timed with democracy and timed with the new institutions that are not strong enough to impose or enforce law, then this risks to take the country to a state of chaos. So not all protests were legal, but we couldn't see rule of law because the state did not have strong institutions. So with the challenge of Tunisia now, I can't see any real win or prospect for those who try to destabilize Tunisia. I can see a bright future for the democratic process, although there are some challenges, but we need to work on the defining points: rule of law and freedom. And we need to build up the remaining constitutional institutions like the constitutional court, so that there is a full judiciary and we have courts to decide whenever we are in dispute. Now, there's an issue when it comes to interpreting the constitution. The president is a professor or a lecturer in constitutional law, and every time we hear from his own interpretation. Of course, he cannot be a president and a judge. He's entrusted to protect the constitution, but he's not entrusted to rely on his own interpretation. So we need institutions, we need hard work, we need perseverance, we need cooperation, we need to break the deadlock between multiple actors in Tunisia for a better future. I won't take long, and I'll make way for the rest of the panelists, which I believe are more positioned as academics to present an in-depth diagnosis of what happened in Tunisia. Thank you very much, and that's my contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Salah, for your talk and for your insightful analysis. But also what attracted my interest is that you mentioned at some point there are regional and international actors who are involved in Tunisian politics, and they are contributing to the instability, or maybe they are trying to maybe involve in this regard in Tunisian politics. Maybe you can later elaborate on that a little bit more. But this is, I think, is a very important aspect for Tunisia. So then we can maybe continue now, Dr. Izzeddin Abdel Mevla, and he will be giving us his view on what happened during the past years and the current status. Please, Dr. Izzeddin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ismail, and thank you so much to awesome Dr. Ahmed Wisal and to all the panelists. As we speak now, the Tunisians are celebrating the 10th year of their revolution. I congratulate them and the whole of Tunisia. I want to make a few points on the evaluation of the Tunisian revolution 10 years on, under a small title of Mixed Messages. As I flipped through many of notes written by Tunisians between yesterday and today on social media, I noticed that there is a mixed messages about the Tunisian revolution after 10 years. But under this small title, there is an overwhelming feeling that Tunisia after the revolution is better than Tunisia before the revolution. This is a generic term that we can find almost everywhere in social media where Tunisians are taking part. But under this generic term, we can find specific evaluations. Let me just take you through some of these. In two sections. The first, I call it on the positive side, and the second on the negative side. So I'm taking most of these from what I have read from these notes. On the positive side, there is almost an unlimited amount of freedom both at the individual and public levels. Freedom of expression, freedom of organization, freedom of movement, freedom of activism, freedom of access to information, and so on. This is an unprecedented situation with Tunisians, and I believe, of course, in the rest of the Arab world. The second point is we have established a working democratic system with the regular, free and competitive elections. People are now able to freely choose their representatives and leaders at different levels, things that were impossible just 10 years ago. Three, there is a constitution that organizes the relations between the different components of power and maintains the stability and continuity of the new political system. We hope this continues in the next years to come. On the negative side, however, there are more points, more details in this, but I just mentioned a few of them. The living conditions of people have worsened, and even in comparison to the pre-revolution period, they are getting much worse. Security has improved, but is still fragile, with certain breaches here and there from time to time. Corruption is sweeping, and it seems the state counter-corruption mechanisms have so far failed to deliver. Poverty is widening, and new social groups are impoverished, with an ongoing deteriorating purchasing power, especially with the continuing devaluation of the Tunisian dinar. Debts have risen dramatically and are eating out of the state budget and continue to hinder its capacity to borrow from the international monetary institutions at a low cost. reforms on the police, the judiciary, the state bureaucracy, and so on are moving forward steadily, but at a very low pace. These areas need to be addressed and worked on more seriously in the future. The second point I want to mention is what is called the Tunisian exception. And I know that many people are interested in this term and has been used largely in writings about Tunisia during the last 10 years. I can say that this exception still holds together, still persists, but it's becoming sometimes a burden on Tunisia itself, because it's moving forward alone. Most of its regional setting is working either against it, are hostile to it, or are not helping at all to move this movement forward. But to me, as a scholar, this is not just a challenge to the counter-revolution, both inside and outside, both domestic and regional, but it is, and most importantly, also a challenge to the established wisdom that Arabness and democracy are incompatible. As an intellectual, this exception serves as a tool, as intellectual tools that help us theorize democracy in the Arab sphere. And I think this is going to be a very interesting tool to use. The third section is the way forward. Few points I would like to make here is reforms of the electoral law has to be done as quick as possible, so parties can govern, deliver, and be accountable. Two, we need to establish the constitutional court to secure the democratic system and avoid any unexpected threats and dangers that might reverse us to the dictatorship. Three, we need to move from the political to the social sphere with a grand strategy to build a sustainable social system and improve the social conditions of people across the board. And four, because social and political, if they don't go together hand in hand, we may face at any point the danger of collapsing either of the two sides. So we have to move forward from now from the level of reforms that have been achieved in the political sphere to work on the social sphere and economic sphere. This is where people will come together to support the new democratic system and sustain the system for the years to come. And I would end there and leave the floor for the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Izzeddin, for your also concrete messages and analysis. And of course, you addressed very rightly to the problems and also the achievements and also the challenges that Tunisia face. And of course, for the followers like us who are following the Arab revolutions, we are very careful also on looking at Tunisia because it is, well, comparing to the others, it is the most successful example. So that's why we give it a very, very importance to the Tunisian case, and we hope that this attempt for transformation will continue in a very positive way, and we wish Tunisians have a democratic, a well-functioning democratic system. So now we can continue to Professor Larbi Sadiki, and as he also shared with us his presentation. So please, Professor Larbi, the floor is yours. There is a voice. Look, Professor Larbi, can you open your voice, your mic? Yeah, now we hear.
Excellent. Thanks so much indeed. I had actually a slide which I wanted to share with you, to use that as my departure points for the kind of analysis I want to briefly share with you. I don't know whether you can see this. What is the facility for sharing this with you?
Yes, we can see it now.
Do you see it? Do you see this democratic parallelism
exactly.
in Tunisia?
Yeah.
Okay. So really what I have here is, let's say, some kind of a sketch of the state of democratization in Tunisia, and what I call democratic parallelism in the transition. So what you see here on the left, you see like the description of the value, and then at the bottom you see the breakdown, instances of breakdown, and then at the top you've got icons, informal, which is bottom up, and then you've got a hybrid kind of transition, top down and bottom up at the same time, and then on the right, you've got state top down. So this, in a way, is one way of, let's say, representing Tunisia's transition, and the value is most pronounced, most, I guess, really worthy of mention. First of all, the dialogism which seems to prevail in Tunisia's democratization. So we've seen over the years kind of a dialogue led by society, not led by the state. And I guess really instead of talking about exceptionalism, as Dr. Azadeen has mentioned, we can talk about the processes that embed that kind of exceptionalism in the Tunisian experience. It is a dialogic, quintessential example of dialogic transition. We've seen all kinds of dialogism permeating the process of democratization, including what's called like a rubaiya, which at some stage earned a Nobel trophy for its for partaking in engaging society, state and society, in some kind of a dialogue for all kinds of purposes to resolve all kinds of issues which were crying for attention. On par with that, what you have another dynamic, and this continues. And I think this is really a wonderful thing, despite the fact that the voices that seem to raise the red flag of the Arab winter, as it were, not the Arab Spring, take these kind of manifestations as emblematic of the sclerosis that's inflicting or afflicting the transitions, especially in Tunisia. I see this really as a healthy manifestation of a lively society that has acquired the means, first of all, to carve out a margin of existence within society, and also to strike back, to speak back. When we have the state, when we have society talking back to the state, I think that is a healthy thing. And I guess it's inevitable that this would cause difficulties, for the state, for society, but it's a price worth having. It's better than having actually some kind of a muted society, gagged society that doesn't have the means of self-representation, self-organization, the support systems that I guess enable it, empower it, to be. That is really important, including the ones that Mr. Salah, my colleagues, Mr. Salah and Dr. Azadeen have mentioned, the Camus, the Casbah protests, and more of the same. I guess really it's a space to be watched. Stay tuned for more. For me, this is a good thing. So if you see the let's say, the journalistic speak of late, whether it's the Independent or the Guardian, there seem to be exaggerating an alarmist tone about these kind of processes, which I disagree. I beg to differ. I think these are good manifestations which prove that there is something happening within the society. And I guess really, having said that, it is important to keep in mind that revolutions are messy processes. I mean, there's no revolution, whether it's the Iranian Revolution, the American, the French. Name a revolution that is smooth. Societies, have to find themselves. They have actually to put a humanist face to these, I guess, really outbursts of popular representation and I guess really that thirst for creating the kind of spaces to be. It's really important. I mean, we talk about the peoplehood, and one way of proving that is via these kind of processes. The other process which is worthy of attention when we try to map out this transition is the hybridity that tend to, I guess, stamp Tunisia's transition. It is at the same time top-down and bottom-up, and here you find like some kind of symbiosis between what is state-led and centered and what is society-led and centered. And I think that touch is unique to Tunisia. I mean, if someone asked, what is the uniqueness, what is unique about Tunisia's transition, then this is one aspect that one, can flag, as representative of, illustrative of the kind of transition that one, ought, to celebrate. Advocacy politics, which is really important, and this is made up, let's say, of a dual approach. So what you have, you've got civil working in tandem with the state. The national dialogue. So you have a national dialogue, led by the state, but at the same time, you've got like, this civility and civism, which are very much like, in the works. They are very much embedded in a brand of, let's say, new politics, mediatory politics, the creation of new imaginary that is, I guess, very, very interesting about Tunisia's transition. And the upshot of that is the multi-partisanship. It's true that one can always rush, into, as my co-panelists, have correctly mentioned, the problems with the transition, but some of those problems are actually, they represent maybe the good aspects about Tunisia's transition. Yeah, there is, let's say, instability brewing, but maybe that is a good thing. We just really have, to recoach our mindsets to accepting that some upheaval is part and parcel of democracy. Democracy is not always processed through formal, smooth, legal, juridical, rational processes. There are other processes which can actually benefit a fledgling democracy like Tunisia's. And then you find like, this ethos of pact making in the offing, and that is really important. And we've seen, over the 10 years, from Atakatul up, to, prior to that, the October 18th forum, which was, I think, organized and undertaken in London. We've seen, I guess, the kind of coalition between Nahda and the Nida Tunis, etc., etc. And I think that is really a new spirit that ought to be celebrated, should not really be underestimated at all. This pact making. How society is creating its own tools, because remember, sort of all the time we think of democracy and democratization as being one size fits all, and the kind of I guess really from the epistemological perspective, that we are used to transposing theories of sometimes abstractions, theoretical abstractions on newly democratizing countries like Tunisia, and we expect like the theory to match what happened, on the ground. But he really sort of, I guess, the idea is to engage in some kind of grounded theory that whereby the exercise of democratizing, the practices, pact making, of mediatory politics inform theory, at least like, from the perspective, of ontology, let's say, how democracies, come to exist. This is really important because it provokes us into asking some very, very good questions that are yet to be taken seriously by the episteme, transitology, the people who study democracy, etc., etc. I don't really want to go on about the kind of values that one, can flag about this kind of transition, including like the coalitional value that's being learned. And here I'm actually invoking Heidegger, learning, unlearning, which are really working symbiotically in this kind, of experiment. And then you go to the top down, where you've got, and this is really the formal, rational, state-led, state-centered, the electoral process, which have gone so smoothly. It's, 2011, 2014, 2019, parliamentary, presidential, etc., etc., which shows the Tunisian people to be remarkable, public, thirsty for representation, self-representation, democratization, etc., etc., and also worthy of the legal benefits and gains. True, as my co-panelists, have mentioned, there's a lot to be yet, let's say, drawn from this exercise, including the different institutions which are yet to be formed, etc., etc. But with this mapping, of this transition, we can say that Tunisia has got really something. Maybe it's not, as Dr. Azedine has mentioned, illustrative of this exceptionalism, which maybe is overplayed, but it's something worthy of study seriously by Orientalists and by us, the people who are looking, with a local lens, local prism. Having said that, one should not romanticize any process, any revolution, any incipient democratization, including Tunisia's. And we find also, like, the let's say, the building blocks of polarization, political violence, lots of examples of those. But I tend to be here siding with Rancière, that a bit of violence is not bad. And you cannot find a project of politics, of polity, economy, society in the Western world from which, we're trying to derive, these notions, of democracy and democratization, that is bereft of a notion of polity that is violence-less. So really the barbarian, frame seems to be there. Tunisia is no exception. It is violence. It is sometimes ruly, sometimes it is unruly, but it is part of that package of making that transition into, hopefully, a more democratic country, etc., etc. If you ask me today, what is, the key challenge for Tunisia? To mention one thing, there are lots. My co-panelists, have mentioned several of those. I would single out social justice, regional development as the key problems that will hinder transition in Tunisia. Maybe that's something, we leave, for the discussion that will follow, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Larbi, for this very eye-opening and fresh ideas that you share with us, and it is also it made us think even more on the transformation of Tunisia, and to consider whether Tunisians will finally make a successful transition. But as you say, we will discuss this further, maybe at a later stage. And now I would like to give the floor to Professor Ahmed. Please, Professor. Your mic is closed.
Microphone. Thank you very much, Dr. Nouman. I also salute all the participants and also the viewers online. Tunisia, of course, is a good example, and the story doesn't start with the Arab Spring Revolution 10 years ago. It started about more than 100 years ago, maybe 150 years, when the Ottoman Sadrazam, or the prime minister, he launched reforms in Ottoman capital. The story, I mean, the reform story, it goes back very far, and it is still a continuing process. I think, I mean, the Tunisians, they, of course, they made a revolution, but it's also mixed with reform, and generally the reform mentality holds and overall holds around the world, and it's more successful. And also I consider Turkey as a reform project. Of course, they toppled the government, Ben Ali regime, kind of forced them to go away, but the regimes doesn't go away quickly, and they have allies inside and outside. So it is a long process, and we have to mix with the reform and with the revolution. And as a sociologist, I also studied social movements, and these changes doesn't take hold very quickly. So it needs a continuous pressure and effort. So if we let down, if we just give up, then the old regime can easily come back. And I think Tunisians, they succeeded in maintaining the framework, the skeleton of the democratic process, but they have to, they need to also work on how to hold these pieces together, how to add some meat to the bone. So only bone cannot function. And I know also there is a foreign intervention in Tunisia, like other Arab Spring countries, that already suffered more than Tunisia, with from north of the sea, Tunisia get intervention very quickly. They get intervention from the Gulf, also from the establishment, regimes, and this weakens the tide. But I think it should, I mean, with internal harmony, I think the Tunisian can work on it. But we realize, or we notice, very hard ideological polarization. I think Tunisians can overcome that, and in Turkey we more or less overcome that. But this ideological polarization is there, that hinders, that blocks the functioning of democracy, or cause a big friction. If you have a brakes on in the car, and you try to move forward, the brakes take you, slow you down, or hold you down. So these brakes, I think one of the brake is external intervention. The other one is ideological polarization. With I think the secular Kemalism, or radical secularist Kemalism in Turkey, was even harsher than Tunisia. But in Turkey, both the Islamists and the secularists, they found a way. They united around democracy, and they found a way to move forward, and it was very active, very, I mean, effective, and still this process is continuing, not over. And I also notice a kind of incapable democracy أو ديمقراطية العاجزة يعني we need also people شباب or the youth they need quick solutions. We have a lot of youth and they need jobs, they need education. Also society needs healthcare and social security, education, all kinds of services. We are missing on that one, and sometimes people get impatient. In Turkey we had I think I made a comparison with Turkey because there are some insights or there are some similarities. Sometimes if you have visaya, tutelage of any kind, you normally blame the one who is up front. In Turkey we had a military tutelage, visaya, and we blame the politicians, but they were incapable or they didn't have the authority. يعني عاجزين كانوا. And this is a problem, and people generally despair from the politicians, and this destroys and weakens democracy. And I think, sorry about this, I think we need to, we need to give some outcome or success for these democratic benefits they should get. So people, even not only in Tunisia, maybe in Libya, in other places, people, when they are suffering in Syria, for example, doesn't mean like if, let's say, Sarraj wins, yeah, that's good, but if he doesn't solve the problems, it's gonna be backlashes. And also, of course, there's authoritarian regimes like Haftar or Sisi even are a lot worse than the democratic ones, but democratic ones also should perform better to give hope for the young generations, and young generations are quickly despaired from this lack of services, lack of taqaddum, lack of progress in all cases. And I think one observation about Tunisia is the last presidential elections where Qais Said, al-Rais, president, he won with a huge popular support. I mean, this is a very big credit, very big asset on his pocket. He could, spare it even more actively. As an external observer, maybe I'm not correct 100%, but I would expect from him to push back the status quo even quicker and harder. If you give up, and I noticed similar things in Morocco also. If you don't push the status, or if you don't ask for more, they will not give you more. So in Turkey we realized we had still, it's the reform method, reform approach that we still keep this إصلاح mentality or reform mentality, تدرج gradual change, but we need to push or demand more because people gave you more power. In Turkey, Erdogan wins about 50 or 55 maximum, and Qais Said, he gained like 70%. It's a big, for a democratic standards, it's a big win, and he should not, he should have formed a very effective team and didn't bow to any pressure, either from France or from Khalij or others. I think this is a kind of a maybe asset or credit he had, and so far I think he remains slow on this. And we need to speak frankly, and he could have done and either force for a presidential system like Erdogan did. So it's okay if like there is one side or there is another side, right wing, left wing, like America. If one wins, he gets the full power, so he serves his term. Like what I mean by incapable democracy, like you discuss forever and you don't get any outcome because there is a ideological gap. But if one wins the majority and he get got authorized for like 4 or 5 years, and he implement his projects. So this is what we are missing, I think, in the Tunisian case, and it is hindering, I think, the progress. We also noticed that there is a problem with brain drain and westernization. There is a debate about Tunisia is westernized but not modernized. So you need young people to workforce and mental force to progress, but Tunisia is losing this by slow population growth, and also huge brain drain is a big problem. And I think Turkey, there is, of course, there is a debate inside Tunis, about Turkey is always framed with one party. Actually, I mean, there are, proximities and good relations, but this doesn't mean Turkey is a secular country in constitution and a long tradition of, Bourguiba. He used the Kemalist ideals and project. But we in Turkey also, we managed to mix this. We managed to get benefit from this maybe top-down modernization, and then we move forward. And when I talk about the Turkish experience, I say tatbi'a and tahrir. Tatbi'a, like normalization, of course, not the Israeli normalization, normalization of Turkish politics with society, with tradition, with Jiran also, with the neighborhood. Turkey was only focusing to the west. Now is opening to east and west and south. So at the end, so this helped Turkey a lot, and also tahrir al-mujtama, yani the emancipation of liberation of politics and economy also helped a lot. So I think we need more comparative studies maybe to understand and to if there is benefit from both sides. But I think we need to see more intellectual engagement. As I use this as an opportunity. Of course, this is mostly about Tunisia, this panel, but I think we need to have a better intellectual engagement, academic cooperation between Turkey and Tunisia. And I think we have a lot of things also to learn from Tunisia, and cooperation also as two democracies. It always helps. Some other old style politics, they have certain benefits. They choose the creamy sectors, and they get big benefit. They neglect other issues. And in Turkey also we have maybe an experience to variate or to تنويع الاقتصاد, يعني how to make a multidimensional economic project. So we can discuss on these maybe in next panels and other things. And I think we are similar in the same direction as two democracies of the region, which are not very common. And we can also cooperate, and we can establish a good cultural and academic engagement, dialogue, cooperation, whatever you call it. And as Orsam, we are also working in this direction. And thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ahmed, for this insightful analysis. And now maybe we can briefly ask some questions. Mr. Salah, I know you need to leave earlier if your plans didn't change, but I would like to, there are some questions about the role of external actors in Tunisian politics. My question is regarding the role of external actors, local actors, but there is also, I'm also curious about the role of Western actors like France. Whether is there any support from France for the democratization process in Tunisia, or maybe France involvement is kind of an obstacle for Tunisia? And there is also another problem, another question maybe related with the foreign policy, is that how political instability in Tunisia affects the diplomacy making of the Tunisian government, or for instance, there were some attempts to involve in the Libyan conflict resolution process. But of course, the political instability somehow affects Tunisians' capabilities to become an active foreign policy player. So can you elaborate on that briefly, please?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the question. With regard to France, generally speaking, we can note from the way international politics is run now that France is among the old powers that is losing grip on many parts of Africa. And this is an alarming position for this member of the old Europe. And Tunisia comes within this. There are other powers that are interested in Tunisia, and France feels the rivalry and wants to keep it for itself. This is the sense of alarm that France is getting, and in that way, France is probably playing a negative role in setting a new Tunisia where there is a rule of law and there's a contribution of all parties, and there's also a prospect of democratization and development. I don't think that France, which been running from behind in Tunisia, is interested in any improvement in Tunisia, especially if it cuts its ties with it. With regard to the point raised in whether the political instability hinders Tunisia from playing moderating or I can feel that Tunisia at this point, the foreign policy of Tunisia is witnessing some foreign policy of Tunisia is witnessing instability the same way as we say that politics is unstable in Tunisia, because now there are new powers accessing to power, and then each has its own setup, its own goals. Some of them, for example, we can see that many among these actors are against, say, Turkey, for whatever reason, whatever Turkey does. If Turkey helps Tunisia, they are against. If Turkey does something, so there are some players who are against Turkey in any way, whatever Turkey does. And there are some powers that are with France, whatever France does. So there is a split, and this hinders Tunisia moving forward and having a diplomatic and having say a positive contribution. And that's why probably Tunisia to some extent did not succeed in playing a role in the stability and improvement in the Libyan problem, as opposed to what Morocco has done. So if we compare both roles, Morocco and Tunisia, we can say that the current situation in Tunisia, the division between political parties, between different members of the political scene, is hindering Tunisia from playing a positive role in building the Grand Maghreb, or in having more effect on the wide Arab and Islamic world.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I can, if there is any other comment, you can contribute. Professor Ahmed, please.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Salah, because now just this Sahara issue, Western Sahara, with America, Israel, and I think it is major developments is going on over there. Why? Because America is settling for or establishing an air base in Morocco, it means France is losing their some grip, and so America, of course, doesn't want to leave. If we think America and Europe is together and China and Russia together as an alliance, two camps, then the situation is that America is coming by itself, or kind of doesn't depend on France as much, because France generally focus on their own narrow interest, as in Libya. When they fail, they talk to Russians to come and help them, but this is a no for America, and Libyan crisis is a critical crisis for Tunisia and for everybody. But America doesn't want to have Russia in North Africa to challenge, because generally the economic side is there is a cooperation between Russia and China. China is focused on the economic side, and Russia is on the security and military side. So this kind of bothered America before and allowed a little bit on the Accord government, Sarraj and others, to move a little bit against France. So there are novelties, new developments in the region that maybe change, and France is maybe losing more grip on Africa, and America doesn't want to give up totally on the African continent, and now investing more in the militarily and maybe other means. So I think it will affect also all the way to Libya, because France also wants to block Turkey from reaching Africa, not only Libya, but also doesn't want Turkey to go to Africa through Libya.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Izzeddin, maybe we didn't mention a lot about the military in Tunisia. I mean, what is the status or role of military in this transformation period or during the last decade? Whether military has been a supportive institution or has been considered as a threat by political actors for Nahda and for other actors also, because given the fact that in the past we know that the military in Tunisia has been in good contact or good relationship with some of the Western actors. And I don't know, how is your evaluation? What is the status of military?
Well, as we call it in Tunis, the military in Tunisia is a Republican military, and it's professional, and it's unpoliticized, or does not want to be part of the political game or to interfere in politics. The military in Tunisia is also ranked as one of the most not corrupt military in the Arab world. And there is history behind this, of course, why the military was put aside and away from politics by Bourguiba. During the revolution, or since the first day of the revolutions, the military played a positive role by first not obeying Ben Ali's regime to shoot at demonstrators, and by protecting the revolution. During every single election, the military organizes or protect the ballot boxes moving from the remote areas to the center and to the capital. So it has been playing a very positive role, and many calls, we noticed that many people called to interfere, for the military to interfere and play a side in politics, but so far, and I hope that this doesn't happen, and that the military remains in their designed places. This is, I think, part of the whole package of the Tunisian exceptionalism, because the military in other Arab countries are very much engaged with politics, and they mostly play a negative role. So this is partly why I think the Tunisian model is going forward and has been a success story so far.
Yeah, this was actually one of the reasons why I asked these questions because recently I also come across some reports about increasing role or maybe intervention of military, and as you know, even in Turkey or when we look at the Arab world, that this experience, I mean, the increasing involvement of military in the civil politics is not a good option, and of course, as we are also a bit concerned and about these reports.
Yeah, there are some small groups who fail to make it to the parliament or to gain what they expected in number of seats, and they fail to play the role they wanted to play in democracy. When they failed, they thought that the only option to get them through the political game is to be part of this movement into politics by the military. But I hope and don't think that this will happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then maybe we can conclude here because I have other questions, but maybe we will continue discussion further at future occasions. Professor Ahmed, if there is any other comments you can add, otherwise I will conclude here the session.
I want to mention on the Libyan conflict where I think as a democratic conflict is taking place there, Tunisia could have, taken a more active role in supporting the legitimate government against, regardless of the ideological proximity or kind of other relations. Tunisia has a huge interest in a stable and democratic Libya. And I think, of course, there are pressures on Tunisia, more than they can maybe bear, but it is still, Tunisia should decide for itself and should give priority to the solution and also supporting the يعني it's not the problem of إخوان أو غير إخوان في in Libya. It's a democratic process, and the coup attempt still there are many supporters, but Libyan people rejects this, and Tunisia can be at least a moral, should voice more vocal voices or stance toward Libya, because Libya is directly affected by even more than Turkey, because there is a distance between the two countries, Libya and Turkey, and we need to, Libyan crisis also very critical for Tunisia, and the external powers, they want to decide and they want to conclude or resolve the Libyan crisis by themselves. If you don't force yourself to the table, to the negotiation table, nobody will invite you, or nobody wants to give you a good voice or good place. So Tunisia has a very legitimate right to be involved in Tunisia, and also need to support the democratic process if they believe in democracy. Of course, I think they do. Libya has a lot of potentials, like Algeria. But Libya is also, both sides. Tunisia can benefit from trade and tourism and all kinds of investment from Libyan side. Even like a crazy guy like Gaddafi time, Tunisians, benefited from development and economy there. They could have, benefit from it more, but this needs further effort or stronger effort from Tunisia. Just don't leave it to, to Emirates or to Russia or France or others to solve it in a good way for Tunisia. No, it doesn't work like that. Everybody wants to solve it according to their interests. So Tunisia should force itself. Of course, they are mediating the dialogue, but they can take a stronger stance to bring them together. There's dragging on of this conflict doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help Libyans, doesn't help Tunisia, doesn't help Turkey. I mean, those who like conflicts, they benefit from it, but we, the people of the region, don't benefit from it. So should force on just only, not, you know, mediating what you say and what you don't hear from the side. You try to bring them, which is the Islamic principle. When two sides, you know, they are fighting, we need to إصلاح بينهما يعني أصلحوا بين أخوين يعني we need, this is an Islamic principle, also human principle, you know, we need to mediate between both sides, and we expect also more from Tunisia on the Libyan conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Uysal. Now we will conclude the session. Mr. Salah and Mr. Larbi has other commitments, and in the last minute, Dr. Ezzeddin also lost connection probably. But thank you all for listening, and we would like to welcome you in our future programs. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.